rise in the morning torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. This makes it difficult to plan the day. The indelible words of E.B. White. This is a dichotomy that we in the world of culture naturally live in. And so today, to explore improving and enjoying the world, I thought we would take things up a level, or two, or three, or four, or five. No, let's go back to four. Great. Have a look at this picture. In 1977, Voyager 1 blasted off from Cape Canaveral, not far from here, and started sending back some of the most vivid planetary pictures we had ever seen. This one was taken on Valentine's Day in 1990 as Voyager was exiting the solar system. It was Carl Sagan who had the idea to have Voyager turn its camera around and take this picture of Earth. That's right, we used Voyager 1 as a 3.4 billion mile long selfie stick. Sagan referred to this image as the pale blue dot. I first saw this picture in the strangest of places. It was pinned up in my broom closet at home. My wife put it there without telling anyone. All I know is that one day I was barreling towards my broom closet, frantically looking for something with which to clean up cat vomit, and I came face to face with this picture and Sagan's eloquent words. He said, "That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being that ever was lived out their lives. Every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam." And for a moment, I forgot all about cat vomit and my emails and the mortgage and lots of other stuff, and I just stood there and wondered how insignificant little me fit into the story of the pale blue dot. And then I had a minor freak out and I closed the door. And for months after, whenever I would go to that broom closet and see that picture, I'd go back to that place. What is my role? What am I here to do? I started referring to it as the existential crisis broom closet, and I completely avoided it. And when I asked Peg why she put that picture up there to begin with, all she would wisely say was, perspective. Now, ultimately, I did calm down with some inspiration from a really great book by Greg McKeown called Essentialism, where I learned that our role on this planet can be boiled down to a few key questions that I'll paraphrase here. What does the world need right now? And what am I really good at that can help with that need? And I realized that if I could answer those two questions, I would have a fighting chance of no longer having an irrational fear of Swiffers. Now, in my travels, and I travel quite a bit, visiting Tessitura organizations all over the world, I've thought about these questions a lot, not just for me, but for all of you as well. Ask yourself, what does that pale blue dot need that our organization is really good at? What does the world need that you personally are really good at? And does the answer to those questions match with how you spend your days? I've become fascinated with this. And so like Voyager 1, I turned my mental camera around and I focused on this community through the lens of those two questions. And I was amazed by what I found. Last winter, after a particularly difficult week, I received the following email from Heather Calvin, who is the Associate Vice President for Visitor Experience and Operations at the Museum of Science in Boston. Hi, Andrew. I have an awesome story to tell you about something we're doing made possible by Tessitura. If by any chance you have 10 free minutes and want to feel uplifted, give me a ring. It's just too good to keep to myself. Now, if you ever want to get me to call you back, send me an email like this. Heather's story starts in the back of a Boston taxicab. She was sharing it with Annette Sawyer, the museum's vice president for education and enrichment, and they were returning from a community event. Annette looked over at Heather and said, I think we need to do something really bold for this community. How do you think the museum can make the biggest impact? Heather considered this. Biggest impact. What does the world need right now? She thought about the headlines. Massachusetts has not been spared by the national opioid epidemic. She thought about the museum. What are they really good at? Enriching and inspiring families. Where does the opioid epidemic overlap with families? She thought about some more headlines. In Boston, the opioid crisis has precipitated a related crisis in the foster care system that is struggling to keep up with the flood of new foster kids, many of them suffering from profound loss, trauma, and abuse. Heather looked up. Helping foster children, she said. I don't really know entirely how, but that is how the museum can make the biggest impact. In the course of a single cab ride, they had their answer to question 1. What does the world need right now? Have you ever had an idea that felt so right that you gained an invincible energy that it was destined to succeed? That is the energy that Heather and Annette took to the Department of Children and Families, the agency that oversees the foster care system in the state of Massachusetts. And they, in turn, put them in touch with Wonder Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to foster kids all throughout the state. Wonder Fund has 3 goals for foster kids. 1, providing emergency assistance. Many of these children arrive with nothing more than the clothes on their back. 2, helping kids dream big, providing them opportunities for a brighter future. And 3, letting kids be kids. After all they've been through, helping these kids experience the magic of childhood. Seeing these 3 goals, Annette and Heather knew in an instant that they had their answer to question 2. Could the museum provide emergency assistance? Not really. But the other 2? Could they help kids dream big with internships, summer science workshops, mentorships, and more? Yes. And could they let kids be kids? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. You see, they saw that the museum could help this social services nonprofit achieve 2 out of their 3 goals by simply doing what they already do really, really well. Now, I love this. I love this, and I'll tell you why. I want to help the world, I really do. And I know all of you do too. It's why we're in this profession. And yet, sometimes in the world of arts and culture, I have this nagging voice in the back of my head, maybe you've had it, about the relative importance of arts and culture versus other world-improving pursuits. You know the one? Yeah, no, arts and culture is great and important, but you're not curing diseases here. You're not saving lives on an operating table. And we're not saving lives, not that way. But take a step back and think about the total sweep of a human life, say of, I don't know, a foster kid living in Boston. Of course, they need food and shelter and safety. But as Wonder Fund figured out with their 3 goals, they also need opportunity and laughter and beauty and meaning, and that's where we come in. Culture makes you whole. Culture makes us whole. Patrick McIntyre is the executive director of the Sydney Theatre Company, and he has a wonderful talk on this topic, where he suggests that after we are fed and housed, nothing is more important than culture. And he doesn't just talk about it. The Sydney Theatre Company is renowned for the artistry on its stages. And they've got a robust education program for kids. And they have another program that I'll bet you've never heard of. It's called Connected, where they teach English and acting skills to refugees and asylum seekers coming into Australia. Now, one could be excused for thinking that acting lessons is frivolous for somebody who's barely clinging on in a new country. But think about what you learn when you learn acting. Confidence with a new language, presence, social norms and body language and the idiosyncrasies of a new country, subtle skills that could prove essential if you're trying to find a job or a home or a new life. You see, Patrick and STC asked the question, what does the world need right now that we are really, really good at? Artistry that inspires and entertains, education that propagates the craft, and yes, acting lessons to help lift up the people who are living on the margins of their community. I wish these programs got more press. I really do, and I know you do too. I mean, I travel around the world and I hear these stories all the time, and it makes me nuts that they're not all front-page news. I really think you all need to put a sign on your building that says, not just for enjoyment, right? Just a big sign, not just for enjoyment. Funny thing, in Copenhagen, with our friends, the Royal Danish Theatre, they have this written over their stage. It says, I blot to list. You know what it means? Not just for enjoyment, literally. You go, Royal Danish Theatre, always ahead of the curve. And the rest of y'all need to keep up. But seriously, they also talk the talk and walk the walk with wonderful community outreach programs and education programs and much more on and off their stages. So yes, in this room and in this community, there are many examples of organizations that answer question 1 with programs that answer question 2. So we've talked about organizations. Now let's look at these questions for you. What does the world need right now that you are personally really, really good at? Now, to answer these questions, or to at least provide an example, let's return now to our Caped Crusaders in Boston. Heather and Annette had a mission to improve the world by helping foster families. They had an enthusiastic partner with Wonder Fund, and with the support of museum leadership that in the moment didn't even know how they were going to pay for it, they had the audacious goal to help as many foster kids as they could. This was going to be great. Until reality. We've all seen big ideas speeding forward with idealistic vigor, grind to a halt with 1,000 well-meaning roadblocks. And here they all came. How are we going to pay for this? And how are we actually going to reach these foster families? And even if we do, how are we going to validate that they're legitimate? And they are so overtaxed already. It needs to be a really, really simple process. How can we do that? And on and on and on. What were Heather and Annette to do? Well, let's look at this question for them. Turns out that Annette is really good at creating a spark in others to think big and push forward new ideas. And Heather, Heather is a solver. She has a unique ability to come up with answers to thorny logistical problems with outside-of-the-box ideas. And so working with so many of their colleagues and coworkers, they all combined their superpowers and started to surmount all of those obstacles. Annette went to the Department of Children and Families and got them to agree to have the foster families be able to sign up for an interest in museum programs on the state side. And Heather figured out that with secure uploads from the state, they could leverage Tessitura, the household model, and, wait for it, pricing rules to validate those families, allow them to get free admission online or on-site in a process that was just as simple as any other visitor. And this is incredibly important. You see, from the beginning, they did not want these foster families to feel like second-class citizens coming to the museum with hat in hand, standing in a separate line. They had the same exact experience as any other visitor. It was just free. And so by combining their unique talents, they surmounted those obstacles, and they did it. They personally helped improve the world. Because you see, the badge that says World Improver is not reserved for people who are working out string theory or drought-tolerant crops, as wonderful as those things are. To improve the world, we need people who can figure out that the happy path from a foster child to magical museum moments sometimes travels right through pricing rules. About 3 months after I got that original email, the museum held a press conference where they announced that they were going to provide access to free education programs and free museum admission to every single foster child and their families in the state of Massachusetts, 20,000 kids. $20,000 kids. And the day that they made the announcement, they had an open house for foster families. And the place was overrun with children. There were press and dignitaries there as well, including Lauren Baker, who's the First Lady of the state of Massachusetts. She is a huge supporter of Wonder Fund and a big fan of the museum. She was there to provide her support, to say a few words, and then to be gently electrocuted. But for Heather and Annette, the most meaningful part of this entire process was being able to talk to people whose lives were directly improved by the idea they had in the back of a taxi. Heather talked to one mom who had 3 foster kids at that time, and she said that the state provided a small stipend to really help with bare essentials, but by the time the weekend rolled around, there wasn't any money left over for meaningful enrichment for these kids. But now they had this program, and it was helping their lives. So let's connect the dots. We started with Heather and Annette and their like-minded colleagues at the Museum of Science, who connected with the state and with Wonder Fund, and ultimately with foster families. 20,000 lives improved. Or over in Australia, where they had fundraisers and teaching artists developing programs at Sydney Theatre Company to connect with hundreds of refugees. Or in New York City, at the Intrepid Museum, where they're creating outreach programs to connect with veterans and service members. Or in the UK, at the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, where they're creating music programs to connect with elderly suffering from dementia. Or in Chicago at the Shed Aquarium, where they have the Shed the Straw campaign that is keeping thousands of pounds of plastic out of the oceans every year. Or in Hawaii at the Maui Arts and Cultural Center, where they have an arts program for school teachers, hundreds of Hawaiian school teachers that are bringing arts back into the classrooms there. And on and on. In this room, in this community, and in the world of arts and culture. You are connecting thousands of dots that are enriching millions of lives, that are bringing a palpable groundswell of energy and change to this place, the most important dot of all. So what did I learn when I focused my camera on this community? I learned what I already knew, that day in and day out, you're making the world better. And there's one thing that I learned that I would love to see this community to do more of. You're making the world better, and you do it without fanfare or recognition, which is noble. But man, I could use some fanfare. As the years go by and we all become more digitally connected, we've all seen the byproduct of that, which is that there's more noise and stress and anxiety. And yet you have these wonderful programs that could be a salve for that. You know, like you, if I'm standing in a long line or if I'm at the airport, I'll pull out my phone, I'll look at Twitter, I'll look at Facebook, I'll look at the news apps, and eventually I'm just overwhelmed by the noise and the static and the stress. And I just wish that there was something that I could push on, even just for a moment, that was guaranteed to make my heart happy. Like that day I got that email from Heather telling me about the foster children and how they were going to help them. So I had an idea. Just like Dorothy and the ruby slippers. Just like Dorothy and the ruby slippers. This community actually has more power than you realize. Just think about it. Even here in this room right now are almost 1,900 cultural professionals representing a broad global sweep of so much good in the world. So I have a question for you. Can you think of one thing that your organization is doing right now that is helping make that pale blue dot a better place? I'll bet you can. And now consider how many of the rest of us know anything about it. Probably not many. So I have a really wacky idea. Why don't we share these stories with each other? You know, not to promote your brand, not to check a checkbox on a social media strategy somewhere, no, just for us. To simply and genuinely share something that you're proud to be associated with. To help lift each other up when we're overwhelmed with all the static and the noise. Little ray of sunshine poking through the clouds. Or to paraphrase E.B. White, as we're doing our work to improve the world, maybe in just a little way we can also enjoy each other's worlds as well. So here's what we can do. Take that thing that you just thought of, that your organization is doing, that you are proud of, and post it. You know, a blurb or a blog or a picture or a video or a link on Twitter or Facebook or your social medium of choice, and tag it with this. So that the next time any one of us needs a burst of happy on an otherwise crappy day, we can search for Share the Culture and feel a little ray of sunshine on our cheek. To remind each other that as we are connecting those thousands of dots and enriching those millions of lives, we need to stay connected to each other as well. To ironically get onto our phones, to explain to other people how to get off of their phones and into their lives through culture. To remind each other that culture is I blot to list, not just for enjoyment. To remind each other not to fear, your broom closets, and to remind each other that no matter how insignificant you might feel some days, you are more significant in the lives of others than you can even imagine. May you never forget that. Thank you.